this is what became Memory Departure. And this person's opinion, he was the boss man in the representative in East Africa. He said, no. He said, no, this isn't. It's not. I can't remember the exact words, but this is not the right tone of voice or something like that. So they turned it down. And then I really spent a long time. That would have been. I must have spent a good 12 years after that, sending it back and forth to various publishers, agents, publishers. And agents turned it down, publishers turned it down. In the meantime, I was writing my PhD, so that was all right. I wasn't idle. And then I started writing my next book, which became Pilgrim's Way. So really, by the time Memory Departure was published, I already had Pilgrim's Way finished. And I had my PhD as well, thank God. And then really, everything seemed to go smoothly after that, despite that long wait.
Thank heavens. So your first three novels are contemporary novels, and then with your fourth novel, your book is shortlisted Paradise, you went into the past. What inspired that?
I think when I was writing the first book is mostly about being there, living in a place like Zanzibar. The second, Pilgrim's Way, was about being in both places, so it's both living in England, but remembering, as it were, being from elsewhere, and how those memories of the other place are part of the life of the protagonist living in England. I think by the time I was thinking of writing Dottie, I had become resigned to the idea that I was going to live in England.
Why did you choose a female narrator?
Partly because I was just interested in the possibility of writing about a woman, and also because I was at the time dealing with I was working in a small kind of community organization thing where most of the people were young black men who had gone through various difficulties in their childhood experiences and educational experiences. And amongst them were some women, and it seemed to me the women had a more stoic sense of how they would deal with their circumstances, whereas the young men were often angry, aggressive, even violent in their response. So I was interested in that, and that was part of the starting point of thinking about a female central figure. But also, so the Hudson figure in Dottie was originally going to be a much more central figure. But as I began to write about the Dottie figure, and I just grew more and more attached, I suppose, to both to her and to understanding how she becomes the sort of the center of a small group of survivors.
Yes, and that's but
I haven't answered the question. Though. Anyway, so this time I was beginning to think that, yeah, that's it. England's going to have to be my home because there was no possibility of returning. And then the government changed, not completely. The leader of the government changed, and there was an amnesty, which meant I was able to go back. And I think it was that, going back, because it because it reassured me that in fact, no, I didn't have to forget about this place. Later on, I traveled extensively. I traveled extensively around the coastal areas. By this time, I'd already published both Memory Departure and Pilgrim's Way. And I traveled for several weeks in Kenya, in Tanzania, and so on. And after that experience, when I came back, my original plan was that I would write something about the culture, if you like, about these places that share culture. But when I came back and sat down to start writing this, I wrote Paradise.
Yes, one of my very favorites. The novel that follows that, Admiring Silence, I think is completely fascinating to read now, because you wrote it, what, 25 years ago? And there's a scene when the central character is talking about Britain. And I just want to read one line from it, which just feels as if it could be written right now, and it's very much what concerned us now. And he says, "There are the factories and warehouses and mechanized farms and model towns and chapels and museums bursting with booty from other people's broken histories, and libraries sprawling with books congregated over centuries." When you write, do you write with some anger in your heart?
Anger? No, not always anger. I mean, when I was writing that, it was, of course, after Paradise, soon after. And I wanted to write in a different register. So, whereas in Paradise, I tried, I was after mostly sort of language, but also a language of restraint and always going forward, hardly any looking back, and so on. But here I wanted to write something that was the language and energy, rather than that was deliberately sort of restrained. And I wanted a narrator who was who that in this kind of cliched way of sort of like unreliable narrator, that kind of thing. I don't really like that phrase, but anyway, I wanted a narrator whom we would find fault with, but whom nonetheless we would grow fond of as we understand his frustrations and anger and all that. But I really, really wanted to think of how it is that somebody copes with, if you like, a feeling, whether it's true or not, a feeling of failure. That he really thinks of himself as somebody who has just made a mess of everything. And yet he writes with this energy, or rather he thinks rather, this energy and self-knowledge and understanding of what's going on around him. So I gave him that language, that sarcastic, annoying, whatever, but nonetheless we see his vulnerabilities through it.
And then the novel that came after that is the first one that I had the joy to publish, which is By the Sea. And of course, this is the one that centers the most on the question of refugees and asylum. And it begins with this incredible scene of a mature man arriving at Gatwick Airport. And he stands there, and in fact, he can speak some English, but he pretends that he can't. And he says to the customs official only the words refugee and asylum. And he has nothing but a few articles of clothing, a towel, and a beautiful carved incense box that the customs official takes away. And this again is from 20 years ago, and this is why I feel that Abdul Razak's work should have been listened to very closely over these last decades. The customs official says, "Why didn't you stay in your own country where you could grow old in peace? This is a young man's game, this asylum business, because it is really just looking for jobs and prosperity in Europe and all that, isn't it? There is nothing moral in it, just greed. No fear of life and safety, just greed." I feel this is a sentence that people should listen to. When you wrote that book, where did that book come? Where did it come from?
Well, it came partly from what was going on at the time. This was around 2000. I think I started it around about 1998. So it's coming up to the language of immigration, as it was still called. We hadn't come around to using the word asylum as freely as we do now. But the language of immigration and the language of kind of strangers arriving was reaching crisis point. There were people coming in at that time from DRC, from Zimbabwe, not from the Middle East in any large numbers. So there are these waves over the decades in the Caribbean, from South Asia. At this stage, it was these new arrivals from parts of Africa. We hadn't yet got to the Middle East, but the language was beginning to hot up again, and the newspapers were doing their stuff, and the government was doing its usual pandering to all of these things. That was one thing. And I guess the other thing is that that I was interested in were to do with the other story that is also there, which is a story of dispossession, of feuding, and how feuds continue, family feuds, that is, continue even beyond their, shall we say, their local place, their place of beginning, their origin. There are so many others. I mean, there were so many interesting things. What led me to write about this about these things, was to put so many different stories of displacement and dislocation. Some of them are familiar, some of them are unfamiliar. I have, for example, an Austrian woman who goes to Kenya and then returns. So I wanted to say that this is a kind of a general phenomenon, this displacement, refugee, and I suppose the hostilities that people meet. But nonetheless, beneath that, there is a kind of generosity, continuing human concern for others.
And the novel that comes after that, which is another of my favourites, is The Beautiful Desertion. And that, I think something that people don't talk about enough about Abdulrazak's work is that there are often very romantic books. And this has a particularly beautiful love affair in it. But there are also, in your books, there's the theme of mixed relationships and mixed marriages. Is that something that interests you?
Yeah, particularly in the context of cultures that are intolerant of it, or of that phenomenon, I mean. So my thought was also, do you remember the film Out of Africa? I'm sure many of you have seen it. Yeah. And there's a scene there of the funeral of the friend of Prince Martin, or whatever his name is, the lover of Karen Dixon. And there's a woman standing at the edge of the cemetery. And somebody asks, who's that? And the answer is that was his mistress. And she's a Somali woman. Actually, that doesn't appear in Karen Dixon's book, Out of Africa. That appears in the biography of Karen Dixon. In other words, what I'm trying to say that while this was common knowledge, as it were, that this gentleman had a mistress who was not a European, nonetheless, it's not something that's spoken about. So that's the first thing I was interested in, that when you say mixed relationships, the way in which the narrative, the imperial narrative, excluded these relationships from the gaze, as well, of I imagine, from the gaze of other Europeans, even though everybody knew about it. I wanted to write about that. And I wanted to write about its repercussions later on for those who were the progeny, as it were, of these relationships, but not to do it in some way of saying here's a confused mixed race person, something like that, but to show how these are people who become part of the culture, but nonetheless everybody remembers and everybody knows, and there is this continuing resistance and hostility to them. But I wanted to do it beautifully.
You did. We really need to go into questions and answers, but I have just one more question before we get to that, which is...
Take it easy, buddy, take it easy.
See you. Which is that, so loss and separation are such huge themes in your work, and how do you think your writing life would have gone if you'd stayed in Zanzibar?
I don't know. I really don't. I don't know at all, but it is something I have thought about. I suspect it wouldn't have gone in this direction because I wouldn't have known about so many of these things if I had stayed. But I often even wonder if I would have written. I really don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Should we take some questions? We can put your arms up. And, okay, let's start in the front row, in the middle of the front row. See.
Thank you. Honorable novelist Abdul Razak Bruna. I congratulate you face to face, also live. May God bless you. You should live long. You have got novel literature, I know. My question to you, what's the elements or any points, especially you identified in your subject, shortly describe? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Can you say the question again?
My question to you, what's the elements or points you have identified in your subject you have got novel?
I'm so sorry, but
Can somebody help?
I think could somebody...
What's your subject?
Subject.
You have got novel, also literature.
All right, what's my subject? I'll hang on to that. Okay.
Thank you.
What's my subject? Well, the answer is a novel is a complicated object. So it doesn't have one subject. That's the great, wonderful beauty of it. So it's not just one thing that a novel is interested in. It could be some of the things we've been discussing. It could be the other things that we haven't actually mentioned that I'm interested in. I'm certainly interested in how it is that so many millions of people now, have their origins in one place but live their lives elsewhere. So I'm interested in this, for example, in this phenomenon, but especially where it concerns, of course, this has been true of human culture and civilization forever, but I'm interested in the contemporary way in which there are so many of us who were from formerly colonized territories and places who now live in, say, in Europe or in North America, or possibly elsewhere. I'm interested in that and how people learn to cope with both the physical, real life, as it were, and the other life that is going on in memory and in the mind, and of course continues in other ways. That's it. That's part of the answer. That will do for now.
Thank you. There is a man in the fourth row from here.
Thank you. My name is Ali Bhotia. I'm one of those Ismailis with connections to Zanzibar. I now live in Singapore. And I think both Zanzibar and Singapore have this unique place among many other places in the world where intersecting strands of culture come and crash into each other and create culture for men. And I just wanted to hear a little bit your thoughts about those places as sources of creativity.
Well, I don't know Singapore at all, except by legend, as it were, by what I have heard and read. I don't know whether they have a special kind of creativity, but people in Zanzibar like to think so. But probably people in Singapore like to think so as well. But I expect it's not necessarily the case. What is good about, and again, I expect this is true of Singapore and many other places, is that I think of it as literal cultures, particularly if they have a part of an important sea route or travel route going back some years or centuries. Dhaka would be another example, I suppose. Mumbai would be another example. Draw people from different places, and that necessarily produces something, I think, more complicated and interesting than a culture that is solidly monocultural. In the long run, I don't think I want to say that that's always better than the other, but it does produce something more interesting, more mixed, perhaps more exciting. I don't know. As I said, Zanzibaris like to think that they do produce really talented people.
I think you can say yes. Next. The art channel.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I must thank my most favorite author here because I have read almost all of his books, and particularly these themes, colonialism, racism, or religious or political issues that are presented in most of his novels. But today's topic is desertion, which is presented in most of his novels, from By the Sea or Paradise or Gravel Heart, everywhere. But I would like to focus on that particular novel, that is Dottie. Here I find the female protagonist, and she suffers from the beginning to the end. And her sufferings I found more acute, more strong than other male protagonists. From the very beginning, she was desiring for a home, and as a third generation diasporic woman, she didn't even know her past, and still she tried to make a home along with her brother and sisters. But my question is, why her sufferings is more severe, more acute, more intense than other male protagonists? Because they are also diasporic, they are also dislocated. But Dottie, I think she suffered more than other male characters. So why? Is there any particular reason for that? Thank you.
Well, of course, the novel focuses on her because she's I guess, the main consciousness that the writer has chosen to invest in. That would be one answer. You can't write about everybody to the same depth, as it were. So this is the driving consciousness of the novel. I guess the other things you might say that that she's given qualities that the others don't have, qualities of reflection and sympathy, sense of responsibility, etc. This is just what the writer has chosen to do. But in this case, it is these things that distinguish her from the others. And it is these things that make her interesting. Yeah, so I don't think the others don't have a life. It's not that the others don't have a life, but just that she has a more interesting life for the writer.
Thank you. I'll go to the hand up over there. No, I just, because I've done them all from here, and I'm going to do one from over there, and then we'll come back.
Hello, sir. So I'm a very young reader, and I just started with Dottie yesterday. So I got that book out of curiosity, and I'm just acquainted with your writings recently. So my question is, being a lost reader, which book to start from? Because by following the discussion, I understood that you have a sequence in mind. You went to the past, then you also discovered the things that were going in the contemporary world at that time. So being a lost reader, I want guidance to start from.
You want to know where to start from? I think just take a chance.
Thank you. All right, we'll go to you.
Hello, I am Dr. Tania. I am from Chennai. I am living in Bangladesh for last few years. I am a doctor, gynecologist, especially I deal with the infertility cases. It's such a delight to meet you. I am really excited. I have read many books of you. I have one single question, that's all. I won't take a lot of time. In the book Afterlives, you have mentioned about that uncle of Ilias goes to Germany and he joins the post supporting Hitler as his movement. Is it a true incidents or it's just fiction?
She's referring to the figure Ilias in the novel Afterlife, which some of you may have read, but perhaps some of you haven't, who was a Schutztrooper, that is to say, a part of the colonial mercenary force, in the German colonial mercenary force, and then ended up in Germany. This might spoil the ending a little bit for you, so I won't go into any great detail. But he disappears for many years, and then in the end it turns out that he had gone to Germany. And that during his time in Germany, he had become a musician. But the real thing is that he had been kind of recruited into the Nazi movement. One of the platforms of the National Socialists was the return, as well, of the colony, reclaiming the colonies that had been taken away by the Versailles Treaty from the Germans. Every European nation in those days thought they deserved a colony, and somehow it was their right, as it were, to have one. Anyway, yes, it's a true story. But the stories, I've fictionalized the story to make it fit in with the rest of the novel. But there is a true story of not just one actually, but certainly one who became an actor, appeared in some films and so on, and did indeed perform at various rallies and events, which were to do with the Right Colonial Bund, as well, the idea of reclaiming the lost colonies.
Well, we're pretty much out of time now. I just want to ask you one thing, well, there are two things, which is winning the Nobel Prize. Can you give us one lovely thing that's come from it and one not so lovely thing?
Well, the lovely thing, of course, that more than one lovely thing, but the recognition, the being told, okay, we think your work is good. But probably the fact that all the books are now back in print and are available again is wonderful. The new editions in different languages that I would never in a million years have thought would be interested in reading, let alone publishing what I've written. So I guess that combination of things, the availability of the works again, and now in so many different languages. The worst thing, there's nothing worse. It's all good.
Thank you so much, Abdulrazak Jana, for giving us this time today, but most of all for giving us 10 miraculous novels. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.